sports, coaches are constantly trying to figure out new ways to improve their athletes' performance in their selective sport. One way that is not knowingly used but is very effective is the use of task constraints. During this video, we will discuss what task constraints are, look at the articles that show how task constraints can be used in sport training by coaching, and the advantages of using task constraints to help improve the performance of the athlete.
First, let's start by providing a few definitions. The first one we're going to define is constraints. A constraint is an interaction between an individual, task, and environmental factors that change how we perform movement. Although individual and environmental factors are important in coaching, we are going to focus on task constraints. Task constraint can be simplified to just a single rule in a sport. A few examples of these are the goal of throwing a basketball into a hoop or passing a football to another player on the team.
Now, how can coaches use this to start improving the performance of their athletes? By using this new knowledge about constraints, and more specifically task constraints, we can start applying it to different situations in different sports to see how a coach will be able to integrate these constraints into their own practices. We will now look at a few articles about how these coaches and researchers use their knowledge of task constraints to improve movements in sports.
Before we can talk about the effects the task constraints have on the athlete, we need to first establish the relationship between coaches and athletes. Lorson and Goodway studied the influence of critical cues and task constraints on throwing performance in younger-aged athletes. In this study, they had coaches prompt the athlete to throw balls at different speeds. The researcher then studied the velocity of the balls thrown after the coaches gave the instruction. It was found that the students changed the ways and speed that they threw based on coaches' instruction. This study is very important to our argument because it gives evidence that athletes will respond to task constraints. Once this relationship has been established between coach and athlete, the coach can begin implementation of tasks that will help improve the athlete performance.
Another article we looked at was the effects of task constraints on the organization of interception movements from the Journal of Sports Sciences in 1997. In this study, they examined how an athlete deals with hitting a ball with a racket when thrown at them at varying speeds and having to hit a ball at varying distances. The 3 different velocity speeds and varying distances are given in a random order during the study. The measurements were also controlled and calculated by computer programs. The study concluded that although there was a variety of results showing that a slower ball approach and closer target were easier to master with practice, the subjects were able to perform the task more efficiently when they adjusted their movement velocities at the time of contact with the ball to be able to cover the distance required by each task presented. This shows that when coaches offer a random order to tasks during training, it will improve the athlete's performance during competition.
The third article we chose, Practical Knowledge and Expert Coaches, On-Site Study of Coaching and Sailing, was more from a coaching perspective. This article was about a study that analyzed the knowledge of expert sailing coaching. All of the coaches in the study employed task constraints to develop and train world-class athletes, specifically the French Olympic sailing team. The article states the activity of an individual in any real-world situation must be analyzed by accounting for the constraints defining the task at hand. The task activity model was chosen here both to analyze the constraints of a coach's task and to describe the knowledge elicited during the adaptive type of activity. From this study, we see how using task constraints in coaching is the best way to coach and teach athletes to reproduce specific movements which will benefit their athletes the most in their respective sports. If the French Olympic sailing team used task constraints, I think it's safe to say that task constraints are one of the best ways to coach. And now I present you with a quote that directly leads us to our conclusion. The implications of sports competition and the means allocated to preparing for top-level performance are so great, it has become necessary to improve our knowledge of the conditions ensuing the effectiveness of the coaching process to design reason-based coaching methods. Second, the proper design of methods and regulations for educating requires a better understanding of the knowledge and skills developed and used by coaches recognized as the most effective in the field.
This quote leads us into our conclusion that task constraints should be used by all coaches since sport and exercise are becoming increasingly more important and prevalent in our society. Studies have shown that the best coaches implement task constraints that greatly benefit athletes.
From this conclusion, we highly recommend that coaches implement task constraints during training, which help develop the specific motor skills desired for the sport, improving for their athletes' performance.
This concludes our video, and we really hoped you enjoyed watching.